Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this seminar on Emirati authors in world languages. The topics of this seminar will be discussed today by two prominent scholars. First of all, let me welcome our first speaker, Isabel Abulhol, founder of the Maghrudi Library Series, founder of the Emirates Airlines Festival of Literature, and she is a well-established activist in the field of writing and reading in the Arab world. Our second speaker who joins us online is Kira Jain. She is the founder and CEO of the Dreamwork Collective and independent printing and digital publishing company that shares the Middle East's most unique voices and powerful stories. We will start with Isabel, who will give us an idea about her efforts and the contributions to the dissemination of Emirati writing worldwide.
Thank you very much, Dr. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everyone, whether you're here in Alain Book Fair or you're watching online. And hello to Kira, lovely to see you. So I have, since I was a child, a passion for reading, and I have huge respect for writers. And so when I arrived in Dubai more than 50 years ago, I felt only a lack of the number of bookshops and the number of authors who were being encouraged. And so I've really spent more than 50 years trying to write the balance, trying to encourage debut novelists, trying to find ways to get young people to read more, because there is no writer that I have yet to meet who is a writer who doesn't read. So first we have to read, first we have to extend our vocabulary, we have to dream, we have to have ideas, we have to visit the past, the future, and feed our imagination. So reading is where you do that, where you look at ideas, and then you will have your own individual ideas. And there are some wonderful Emirati writers who were writing in Arabic, and some of them got translated into English, but there is still the challenge of distribution to the rest of the world. So within the Arab world, there is still a limit of distribution across the pan-Arab speaking countries. And that does limit very much the growth of best-selling writers. The other thing, so when, apart from Maghroudi's, which was always like, I've got 5 children, and Maghroudi's was like my 6th child, a very troublesome child, always causing trouble for me. And then I started a publishing company for children called Jerbo Books, publishing books in Arabic and English, children's books, because I felt this was in 2001, there was a gap in giving children the kind of books that I saw being published in other languages, and there wasn't as many. So I tried to address that, and then finally founded the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature to bring writers to meet Emirati writers, to have discussions, to export Emirati writers to other parts of the world. So I've been very busy with one goal, really, to get more people reading so we can have a society that will value our writers.
Okay, Elizabeth, thank you so much for this insightful introduction. And also now let me move to Kira, and would like you, Kira, to provide us with an account about your initiative in the Dreamwork Collective Company. In the same vein, regarding the integration of local Emirati literature into world literature.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Doctor. And Isabel, it's such a pleasure to be here with you, because you've really paved the way for so many people like myself that wanted to create some change in the industry, but also for so many of the writers that we serve. So it's really exciting to be here today. And we are a baby company. We haven't been around near as long, so only for the last 5 years, but it was kind of born out of a need of so many people coming to me wanting to know how to self-publish their work. So in 2015, I self-published a book, and it was quite tricky at that time navigating how to do that and how to get that book not only published but on shelves in the region. So when I managed to do that, I had a lot of people asking me, how is that possible and how can we do that too? So it just started quite organically with me trying to help other people do what I had done before, and then just grew into what it is today, which is a full publishing house. But in terms of Emirati authors, one thing that I would always hear when they came to me was that they felt like publishing in English in particular would give them a better chance at getting their stories into the hands of more people. And that's what we really wanted to do, was to support local authors in getting their work abroad. And we've had incredible support from the local literature community here and the bookstores and so much support, but we really wanted to be able to take what talent and what stories exist here and export them and have Emirati authors have their books on the shelves in the US or the UK or Australia, and ensure that those books were able to stand on a shelf next to other world-renowned authors as well. So it's been a short time, but we've managed to have launches in major cities around the globe and really start actively searching for talent in the region that we can share abroad.
Okay, thank you, Kira, for this useful information about the activities of your emerging company. Now I'm coming back to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, what kind of books written by Emirati authors do you think that they deserve to be communicated to the outside world, to be translated and to be deployed and disseminated worldwide?
I think one of the classics of Emirati writing is His Excellency Mohammed Al-Mar with Dubai, excuse me, Dubai Tales and The Wink of the Mona Lisa. Those are short stories written in Arabic, a collection of short stories, and they have been translated, but I think they might be out of print. And it is a real glimpse into Emirati lives, that he gets inside it, and he's not shy of showing a different, say, viewpoint than you would get if you just were from the outside. So I think those are the kind of books that make fascinating reading, because as readers, when we're reading books in translation, we want to discover the other side. We want to understand other cultures, and a book that opens the door into that culture in a very clever way through storytelling, I think that is really, really important. So I keep asking him, begging him he's got more short stories, but he's so busy that he hasn't yet published them. But I think short stories are a great way. But as I said earlier, the biggest problem, I'm sure Kira agrees with this, is the distribution. So if we're looking at distributing, first of all, we need Emirati writers' works to be available in Arabic across the Arab world. That is a huge logistical problem at the moment. There is not, as there is, for example, with Magrudi's, I can order any book, 6 million books in print any time. I go onto Nielsen Book Bank, I know where it is, and I can place an order for it. Okay, it may take longer to come from Australia or America, but I can get my hands on it. I have that as a bookseller, I have that ability. Within the Arab world, it's segmented, so it becomes so much more difficult, and it means that each country, so Egypt is a huge population, and they will have distribution within Egypt, but maybe that's not as easy to get it to other countries and vice versa. And for the Emirates, which is relatively small in numbers compared to Egypt or Iraq or Syria, it's even harder. And you look at all the GCCs, to get a book from here to Kuwait, to get a book from here to to Saudi, it's not as straightforward as it is getting a book from UK or US. That needs to be addressed if we are to encourage translations of Emirati writers, or we go down the route of publishing the translators with international publishers. We publish Emirati writers with international publishers abroad, so that they have the marketing and the distribution and the network to sell it. So that is another option. I don't know what Kira thinks.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Kira, do you think that the only way to get the world acquainted with this great civilization that's being developed in the Emirates in the last decades, that books are only enough for this transfer of knowledge? I mean, the culture industry in the UAE is diverse. We have other cultural products like movies, like other things. What do you think? Do you think writing is enough, or just to focus only on books, or there are other options?
Oh, there are so many options. Music, theatre, series. You know, there are so many ways you can do it. But here we are at Al Ain Book Fair, and my first passion is books. So I think if you look at music, if you look at theatre, if you look at film, there is behind all of those a writer. It all starts with a creative writer. Even advertising campaigns, there is someone who is bringing those words together, bringing it on a storyboard, making it into something that tells a story. It's about telling a story. So it's more about the word. It's about how we put the Emirates on a world stage. And I do think Expo is going to be a brilliant way of bringing the world to the Emirates and showcasing the wonderful and diverse things that are happening in the Emirates. I totally agree with you about the culture. It is yet to be discovered. And I think that this is a great doorway into sharing Emirati culture far and wide.
Okay. Kira, what's your take on this?
I think the benefit of books is the longevity that they have. So we work with a lot of young up-and-coming authors who are very experienced on social media, which is another platform through which we're able to share stories very easily. I always say, if you post on social media, you're a publisher today. You're publishing creative works for people to read and explore. But I think with books, until this day, there isn't any other medium that has stood the test of time. And so if we're telling stories that we want to capture a moment of time or capture the incredible history and journey that the UAE has, that there is no other medium that can really do that other than books.
Okay. Let's go to translation, because the translation is one of the mediums of just transferring knowledge from one culture to the other. In the United Arab Emirates and also in other parts of the Arab world, we have been translating from Western languages all the time, or most of the time. And very, very few books were translated from Arabic or from Emirati cultural products into other foreign languages. And even when some Western companies start to translate from Emirati literature or from Arabic literature, they select specific books which would reflect the old image which is taken from colonial and Orientalist culture about the East. So they were selecting some books like, for example, books that talk about the operation of women in the Arab world, or et cetera, et cetera. So what do you think, how can translation being used or being transformed into an important and significant dynamic in this transfer of knowledge?
Okay, so I don't know if you ever met the late Dennis Johnson Davis.
Oh, yes, sure.
Yes. So he was the first recipient of the Sheikh Zayed Award, Personality Award.
Yeah.
And I knew Dennis from when I first came here.
Yeah, yeah.
And he had a passion, as you know, for the Arabic language.
Sure.
He became a Muslim, Abdul Wadud. He lived in Cairo. He passed away in Cairo, God rest his soul. He was one of the first to encourage, certainly in the West, translation of renowned authors. And he, obviously, Naguib Mahfouz, he translated, he was a great friend of his, Tayyib Saleh, and others. And he also was a great friend. He came here I think he came to the Emirates in the late 50s, early 60s, and did work on some of those. I think he set up the broadcasting radio in Dubai and acted as a translator. But he had a passion for the language. So although his mother tongue was the English language, he had a really, really good grasp. And so he could take the essence. He'd lived in this part of the world. So it's very difficult for a translator, even if they spoke good Arabic, if they've not lived here, if they've not absorbed the culture, how can they translate the nuances? How can they bring that flavor if they've never eaten Emirati food, if they've never traveled in these beautiful dunes and to the islands around the coast of Abu Dhabi? So I think it's very difficult to give the translation to someone, say, who's in, maybe they're in America and they have studied Arabic, they've got very good Arabic, they could have visited maybe Egypt or somewhere, but they've never been here. So then they're going to miss things. I believe they're going to miss things because they're not rooted in the culture here. So I think I agree with you about the stereotypes, that there was very stereotypical views of this part of the world. When I first came here in 1968, hardly anyone that I spoke to had heard of, as it was then, the Trucial States. They didn't know where it was even. And they imagined that I would be staying in a tent with camels outside. And I said, yes, of course I will. But because I actually thought it was quite adventurous to even have that opportunity. So those now, with social media, with the internet, those kind of things are being turned away. So I think that we have a great opportunity for showing the world what has happened in the Emirates over the last 50 years. And particularly, you speak about women, about the empowerment of women here has been tremendous. There are things here that women can do that in other countries in the West they would not have. It's still embedded because they're older countries. Here they've gone to the forefront very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Kira, what do you think of the same issue? Would like to see your perspective on the same issue.
I agree, especially with the internet and social media. Everybody has the opportunity to tell their own story in that way. So a lot of those stereotypes are starting to disappear in that sense because more people have access to platforms where they can share their own truth. But I agree completely with Isabel that not living here, it's very difficult for any translator to understand some of those nuances. And what I see as a really a great opportunity for the industry to come together is in supporting local Emirati translators. So if we can encourage people who are based here to enter into that profession, but also have a really robust publishing industry here that gives them plenty of opportunities to really have a great opportunity and profession in that field, I think it would be incredible to be able to support Emirati translators and work closely with them within the industry so that we're not always forced sometimes to be able to work with people abroad or publishers abroad to be able to get those stories out into the world.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, what do you think the best way to get the world acquainted about the Emirati culture? People read about the Emirates, in the media, and they saw photos of in Dubai and and so on. What do you think I mean, in terms of I'm speaking about the culture industry itself. What do you think, which aspects of the Emirati society could be translated or could be transferred to the other world that would give the world a more comprehensive image about Emirati culture rather than what they see in media?
I'm not sure. What we don't want is to fit in to other cultures in the way that, you know, that the joy actually of each culture is their differences, not their similarities. So each country, each culture have different foods that are embedded into their traditions and their heritage. They have different festivals that they celebrate. They have different songs. They have different traditions at different times. So when a baby is born, or people get married, or someone passes away, there will be all sorts of traditions.
Okay.
And I think, certainly when I travel to other countries, I'm interested in the differences, not the similarities, because I think it's important that the world wakes up to that there is not one size fits all. Just because you do it this way, it doesn't mean if we do it this way, it's wrong. It's that broadening of people's horizons. So there doesn't, I think there was a sort of, I feel looking back at, say, Western history, the colonial times, there was we are the colonials, we know best. Well, you don't know best. And everyone is waking up to that now. They're removing statues in the old, you know, in the West and in America of people that were heroes, supposedly. And it was this idea that we will force you to adopt our culture. We are invading you, and we're going to, and that is totally unacceptable. So I think we need to not be wanting to fit anyone's idea. The truth of the culture needs to come out, and it needs to be celebrated, and no apologies that it's different. It should be different. That's what we want.
Okay. Kira, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I agree. I think the differences are really important. And I think in any story, whoever the reader is able to see themselves in that story in some way. But that it's really important that I guess the stories that are shared now have that unique balance of being able to share the differences and an authentic, very honest story, and not water that down. And I think one of the challenges that we see as a publishing house is, you know, where does that story fit, and how can we really get that story into these broader markets around the world? And the last thing that we want is to water any of those stories down to make them more interesting or palatable to people's certain tastes. I always believe that no matter what story it is, there's someone out there that wants to read it and is looking for the opportunity to be curious and learn something that they didn't know before. I think we're living in a time where information is so accessible that we don't need a book to tell us an answer or a fact. We can go to Google and get that information. What we need are books that tell a story, that make us access those parts of our brain that, you know, really encourage curiosity and wisdom and understanding, and this more exploratory approach to the things that we consume today.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, since the title of this seminar is Emirati Authors in World Languages, do you think the translation of literature only is enough to, you know, to give the world this a panoramic view about Emirati culture? Do you think literature is enough for this?
No, it's not enough. It's never enough, but it's a start, and it is one pillar of culture that you are, by translating it, you're making it accessible to millions of others, as long as you can distribute it. And I was just thinking about, so if I will get an email or a letter in Arabic, and I can read some of it, but I often will just pop it into Google Translate. And it's wonderful because Google Translate is literal, so it will translate the letter, and it is so different, the formation, the respect that you receive in Arabic when you are conversing by letter or by email or by conversation. It's very different, and I love that. I just think it's a sort of intrinsic. The language is intrinsic to how everyone is dealt with. The respect that, as a female, you receive, which you would not receive probably in the West. You know, it might be all right to be equal, but here we're not only equal, but we're respected. You know, we have sometimes special cues, so we get to the front because we are female. And I think that's a very honourable thing, because there is a great recognition in Emirati culture of the mother and how important she is, and how much respect she will gain as a sort of the matriarch of society. And I think that translation is very important, but I think we also have to look at language. So I don't know where you stand on modern standard Arabic versus colloquial Arabic, because there is a big debate to be had. Now, are we going to free up Arabic and let it fly in uncharted waters? Or are we going to say it's only possible if it's in modern standard Arabic? Because I'm a believer that language needs to mutate, it needs to grow, it needs to change to be accessible. Particularly, I'm talking here about young people speak dialect in different dialects across the Arab world, and what they learn at school is modern standard Arabic. Now, Palestinian Arabic or dialect is about 60% similar to modern standard Arabic. If you look at Tunisia, it's probably 20%. So they are having to translate the language, their mother tongue, their Arabic, into another Arabic. How about that? Because I think this is a big discussion that we need to tackle bravely.
Okay. Kira?
Yeah, that's a really good point, what Isabel makes, and it's challenging to think of how many stories, great stories, that we're missing out on because of some of those different barriers that exist. But I think in terms of translation into foreign languages, what's really important is, in some ways, it does need to be standard so that it is more manageable for editors and translators to be able to take that work and turn it into multiple different languages. It becomes quite a big job for everybody if they're managing lots of different dialects as well. But I agree with Isabel that that's a big discussion that needs to happen, and a conversation that's perhaps ongoing, because it really is looking at how do we access more of those stories and make them available to more people, and language is a big part of that, and not watering it down or changing it into something that is different than what it was originally. It's difficult. You're going to lose elements of that story that really make it what it is. So it's not an easy task by any means.
Okay, from your own experience, do you think that the Emirati literature being translated into other languages, that they fulfilled the horizons of expectations of the Western reader?
Can you repeat that?
Okay, from your experience and from your background, do you think that the Emirati literature, which has been already translated into English or into other languages, when they were introduced in the West, did they fulfill the expectations or the horizons of expectations of the Western readers? About because this is a new kind of literature. I mean, it's Arabic, but from my own experience, it was different for them. I translated many years ago 2 collections of poetry by Emirati poets and 1 collection of short stories by Fatma al-Mazrouai, and then I introduced them into 2 conferences in the United States, one in the United States and one in Canada, where I live. And then really, how the audience accepted this, it was amazing for me. I didn't expect them to welcome this kind of writing, because they told us, even those who are specialized in Arabic literature, they said, we have read about Egypt, about Syria, about Iraq, about Palestine, but we have few things coming from this part of the world, from the Gulf area. So what do you think of this? I mean,
I think it's brilliant. I think there are unique stories from here that need to be gathered very, very quickly, because history is changing so fast, and because of the oral traditions here, those stories are in people's memories, and they need to be. They were talking a bit earlier on the talk before about Ahmad Dawais and all of this, the jinn and the monsters, and that when electricity came, they disappeared. There are so many incredible stories that will be different and unique and special to the Emirates. And between if you look at the Emirates, between the mountains and the desert and the sea, those are 3 distinct areas and groups of people who lived in those areas who have different stories to tell. And how are we going to define Emirati writing? How are we going to give it, a world platform? As you say, the thing with Egypt is they have a huge population, and they've been doing it for a very long time. So we need to stand tall and be allowing the stories of the Emirates to be told and to be available in translation, because then you are giving people an insight, as you found when you translated these works. Now, we have had quite a lot of success pre-COVID in exporting Emirati writers to other festivals. So we make connections with festivals, literary festivals like our own one, and we say we have a great writer, and we send them there so they will gain more audiences. But then we have the problems of the books, and are they available in translation, and all of those hurdles to overcome. But nothing is insurmountable, and I think the more we can encourage reading to therefore encourage writing, the 2 cannot be disconnected. And the same with translation. To be a good translator, you have had to have read widely in both languages. So if your mother tongue is English and you are translating from Arabic to English, you've got to have a huge knowledge of Arabic literature as well as English literature. So you've got those skills, because translation, you are a writer. You're not just translating, particularly a novel. You've got to bring all of the literary creativity across to ensure that the reader gets a very similar experience to the original.
Thank you. Kira, your perspective, please.
I agree. I think the reading is so important, and as a local publishing house, our mission is really to publish books that people here will resonate with. They'll want to read them. They'll find them interesting. They'll see themselves in it. There will be a lot of interest in the books that we're publishing locally as well. So I think, there does need to be that reading first. But our experience has been similar to yours. When we've taken books abroad, there's always been a really positive response and a lot of interest. And we publish a lot of nonfiction, so it's not specific to the culture here or the region itself. Sometimes it's just someone's incredible journey, professionally, personally. It's a memoir, it's a story. And what's been amazing to see is that people respond well to just a good story. So if it's not so much about living here and the environment and the culture itself, there's so many incredible stories here that alone people are interested in those. So that's been our experience, which has been really, really positive.
Thank you. Isabel, if you are going to nominate some books representative of the Emirati writing, will you nominate those books that are dealing with the new Emirati society, this multicultural, multilingual, cosmopolitan society, or will you focus on books that talk about the Emirates in the pre-oil era? Which ones do you think will be more, eligible to be accepted by Western authors?
I love the historical novels. I love the past in anywhere, because it's very romantic, and there's something beautiful about the stories of old and how different it is to today. So I think that many readers love that kind, but I think there's also a complete new dynamic with what's happened in 50 years, that we have come to a different world than what we were in. And so I think there's a place for both those stories. And I know that the Emirati writers, for example, Jamal al-Shihi, الكاتب publishes lots of children's books in Arabic, and he's had great success with those in simplified Chinese in Mandarin, taking those and getting them published in China, and that is a fantastic. So he's sort of publishing them there, translating them there, and printing them there, so you take away all the logistics in between. So that is a great story. We had Maha Gergash, who wrote in English, but she wrote a beautiful book about the past called The Sandfish, and it was so popular, and it was published internationally, so therefore it got sold everywhere, in America, in UK, etc. So there are limitations to publishing within the Emirates currently because of distribution. So I think really to get our story, the Emirates story, out there, we sometimes have to publish abroad or have an agreement with an international publishing house or distributor to take it. And I think what Kira's doing with her collective is acting as a hub and a nucleus for writers looking to publish their works in a very novel and exciting way. So I think this is what is great with a young country, is that you've got entrepreneurs trying new ways and discovering how we make it work together.
Okay, thank you. We still have 5 minutes, and in those 5 minutes, I'd like both of you, we'll start with Kira, to tell our audience and our followers on the social media about the obstacles and the challenges which you confront in your initiatives or in your mission, and also about your ambitions and the future plans. Kira.
It's a good question. To Isabel's point, distribution is the hardest thing, and particularly as a local business, we want to support the industry, we want to grow the industry here, but that's very difficult to do. We always have to partner with people abroad to be able to fulfill the goals that we have as a business and trying to get our books distributed globally. So the more support we have here in first just identifying and acknowledging the issues that exist in growing this industry, and then looking at the opportunities we have to really nurture the local entrepreneurial community and filling some of those gaps so that we can create a really robust ecosystem here that makes it a lot easier to engage abroad. So in terms of our goals, it really is about supporting local authors and writers and nurturing them. We publish a lot of first-time authors. They've never published before, so we like to really educate and nurture the growing talent here, but to also really push the industry to grow and innovate and develop and try and overcome some of these challenges.
Thank you. The final word to you, Elizabeth?
Yes, so I think it's wonderful that Her Excellency Sheikh Badur bin Sultan Al Qasimi is president of the International Publishers Association. It gives real opportunities for partnerships internationally with other publishers to try and find ways of exporting and putting better solutions in place. So challenges are many, and each one is slightly different. So I don't see translation as per se as the problem. I don't see laying the book out, the graphic design, the font, all of that as a problem. The biggest problem is how do we get the books into the hands of readers? You know, because if it's in the Emirates, it's easy. Okay, we can distribute it, no problem. We can get to Oman, not as difficult. We can get to Saudi by road, but all of this takes time, effort. You have border controls. There's no unified ISBN numbers as there is in other places. So technically, we are not there yet. We need technically to have the systems in place, and we should use the model that we know works, which is what the West do. We know that works. They have large international distributors who then distribute. You know, the publishers aren't distributing, they hand it to distributors who then have the logistics to get it everywhere in the world. And I think we need to look at, yes, we are all different countries, but we need to look at Arabic language as a whole and see how we can, in some areas, come together and look at working with the language. Rather than the countries, it's about the language, because it's one language, and that is a very unifying area. So, for example, in UK and America, it's English, but it's American English in America and English in England, and Australian English, I think, is English. It follows the same thing. So there are different versions, but the rights are given, and then different, you know, publishers take the rights for that and they get on with it. But then you get big deals. So we're looking at, you know, bestsellers selling 6 million books. That does not happen in the Arab world. That's where the financially it becomes viable. If you're selling 1 million books, and I can remember at the festival, Saouda Sanusi, the Kuwaiti writer of The Bamboo Stalk, who wrote and won the International Prize for Arabic Fiction some years ago. It was the best-selling winner at that time. 55,000 copies were sold in Arabic. He sat with another author at the festival. They were there. She was from Great Britain. She'd written a book. She was medium. She'd only sold 6 million copies of her last book. So, you know, you can make a lot more marketing. You can do a lot more if you sell more. Numbers. It's a numbers game in the end to make publishing work.
Thank you, Isabel. Our time is over, but we can take one question, one short question, if any one of our honored audience would like to ask. No questions? Okay. Thank you so much. By the end of this seminar, we would like to thank our distinguished speakers, Kira and Isabel, for their insightful presentation in this seminar, and also would like to thank our honored audience, whether here in this hall or our followers on the social media. Thank you so much.